If you woke up this week, looked at fuel prices, looked at the markets, or even just heard people talking about another global crisis, you might be thinking the same thing a lot of people are thinking right now. How did a war in the Middle East suddenly start affecting everybody? That's the real story here. Because this is no longer just about missiles flying over Iran, Israel, or American military bases. It's not just about military headlines, dramatic speeches, or political posturing. This has now turned into something much bigger, a choke point crisis. And at the center of it is one narrow strip of water that most people had barely heard of before all of this exploded. The Strait of Hormuz. And right now, that tiny strip of water is acting like a pressure valve for the entire world economy. That sounds dramatic, I know, but honestly, it's true. Because when people hear war, they usually imagine tanks, fighter jets, explosions, cities under attack. What they don't picture is shipping lanes, insurance rates, tanker routes, fertilizer supply, and oil cargoes. But in the modern world, that's where a lot of the real damage shows up. Not only on the battlefield, in your wallet, in energy prices, in supply chains, in the cost of living. And that's exactly why this story matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important waterways on Earth. A massive share of the world's oil and gas flows through that route. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and Iran all depend on it. So when that route becomes unsafe, the world doesn't just notice, it feels it. And that is exactly what is happening now. Since the war escalated, Iran has turned that area into a danger zone. Drones, missiles, mines, threats against commercial shipping, all of it has made the strait increasingly risky for the enormous tankers that normally move through it every day. And once fear enters shipping, everything slows down. Captains hesitate, insurers panic, companies reroute, traders scramble, prices jump. That's how a regional war becomes a global economic problem. And here's the thing that makes this worse. Reopening the strait is not as easy as politicians make it sound. From far away, people hear a leader say, "We'll open the route." And it sounds simple. Send the Navy, protect the ships, problem solved. But real life does not work like that. The shipping lanes there are extremely narrow. Huge tankers have to move through tight channels in waters close to Iranian territory, near islands and coastlines that create perfect cover for attacks. Even if a military coalition is assembled, that doesn't magically erase the danger. A tanker captain is not going to relax just because someone gave a confident press conference. If there are mines in the water, that's a problem. If there are drones overhead, that's a problem. If there are fast attack boats, mini submarines, or suicide-style maritime threats, that's a problem. And even if one or two ships get through, that doesn't mean normal shipping has returned. That's the difference between a headline and reality. Reality is slower, messier, more expensive. And the numbers coming out of this crisis are ugly. Oil flows have dropped sharply. Physical cargo markets are under intense stress. Some grades of crude have surged to extraordinary levels. Jet fuel is up, diesel is under pressure. Refiners are scrambling for alternatives. Traders are paying huge premiums just to secure supply. And one of the most important points in all of this is that even if the route starts reopening soon, the disruption doesn't just disappear overnight. Because once a system this big is thrown off balance, it takes time to put it back together. That's what a lot of people miss. They think reopening the waterway means the crisis is over. Not really. It means the recovery can start. And those are two very different things. There's also another side to this story that honestly deserves way more attention than it's getting. This is not only an oil story, it's also a fertilizer story. A huge portion of global fertilizer trade passes through that same region, including key materials used in agriculture. So if this crisis drags on, it won't stop at the gas station. It could eventually show up in food production, harvest costs, and grocery prices. That's when people who never cared about a map of the Gulf suddenly start caring a lot. Because once it reaches the supermarket, it becomes real for everybody. And let's be honest, that's how these global crises usually work. First it sounds distant, then it sounds serious. Then it hits your bills. Now, politically, this whole thing has become even more confusing. Donald Trump has been sending mixed signals about the war. At times, he has talked like the mission is close to being wrapped up. At other times, he has sounded far more aggressive, rejecting the idea of a ceasefire and insisting that pressure must continue. That kind of mixed messaging may play well in a political soundbite, but in a crisis like this, uncertainty itself becomes a problem because markets hate uncertainty. Allies hate uncertainty. Shipping companies definitely hate uncertainty. If the people actually moving oil, gas, and cargo around the world are not convinced the situation is stabilizing, they behave defensively, they pull back, they wait, they charge more, and the whole system tightens even further. That's part of what we're seeing now. There's also a very visible split between Washington and some of its allies. Trump has openly blasted allied countries for not doing more to help reopen the strait. He has clearly wanted broader support, but many governments are extremely cautious about getting dragged deeper into a war they did not start and do not fully control.
We are ready to ensure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz diplomatically. However, there will be no...
And honestly, from their perspective, that caution makes sense. Helping secure a shipping lane sounds technical on paper. In reality, it could mean entering one of the most dangerous military environments in the world, with a real chance of escalation. That is not a small ask. So now the US is in a situation where it wants the world to help stabilize a crisis that the world is deeply nervous about stepping into. That is a very difficult place to be. Meanwhile, the military buildup itself tells you how serious this has become. Additional US forces are moving into the region, more pressure is being applied, more options are clearly being prepared. And whenever you see that combination, economic stress, military buildup, diplomatic friction, and unclear timelines, you should pay attention. Because those are the conditions where miscalculation becomes very dangerous. And then there's the strange contradiction at the heart of all of this. On one hand, the US is trying to punish Iran and break its leverage. On the other hand, there have already been moves designed to ease supply pressure, including steps meant to get more oil into global markets and cool the shock. That contradiction tells you everything. This war may be military in one sense, but economically, nobody can afford for the shock to spiral out of control. That includes Washington, that includes allies, that includes markets, that includes ordinary families. Everybody now wants two things at the same time: pressure on Iran and lower energy pain. But the longer Hormuz stays disrupted, the harder it becomes to have both. And that is why this tiny waterway has become the real heartbeat of the story. Not the speeches, not the slogans, not even the daily battlefield updates. It's the ships. Are they moving safely or not? That's the question. Because that single answer tells you whether the crisis is easing or whether the world is still stuck in the danger zone. And right now, despite all the tough talk, the honest answer is that the system is still under heavy strain. That matters because the global economy is built on trust almost as much as it is built on supply. If businesses trust that routes are safe, they move. If they trust that political leaders have a plan, they calm down. If they trust that the military can secure the passage, they return. If they don't trust any of that, the fear itself becomes part of the crisis. And maybe that's the clearest way to understand what the Strait of Hormuz means right now. It is not just a body of water. It is a test of military credibility, a test of political coordination, a test of economic resilience, and honestly, a test of how fragile the modern global system really is. Because think about it. One narrow maritime corridor, one war, one escalation, and suddenly fuel, trade, agriculture, markets, and diplomacy all start shaking at the same time. That should make everyone pause. It should also remind people that global stability is a lot thinner than it looks when everything is calm. So where does this go next? That depends on one thing more than anything else: whether safe, regular transit through the strait can actually resume in a credible way, not as a political claim, not as a one-day media moment, not as a hopeful tweet, but for real, steady shipping, lower risk, restored confidence. Until that happens, this story is not over. And as long as it's not over, the war is not staying in the Middle East. It's already spilling outward into prices, into policy, into daily life.